somebody could try to reach out to her and get her the link if she needs it.
Yeah, I'll work on getting that link to her as soon as I get everything set up for our live stream broadcast, and we are recording now, so we're good.
Okay, great. Well, with that, since it is about 6:34, let's get started with tonight's Admin and Public Works Committee meeting. It is Tuesday, July 14th. And with that, looking at the agenda, the first item will be the roll call.
Okay, Chair Garitano.
Present.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Here.
Councilmember Brost. Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Farmer. Councilmember Flashar.
Here.
Councilmember Remy.
Present.
Councilmember Rambo.
Here.
All right, thank you, Carla, for that. Moving on, since this is our first meeting with the new council, we will have the election of the committee chair. So are there any nominations from the group? Councilmember Bertolino raised his hand.
I will nominate Joe Garantano to continue as our chair.
I second that.
Okay, I did
Don't take
see.
seconds.
I did see for a second. I know Rob, you seconded, but I did see Councilmember Edens had her hand up as well. So, are you okay with that?
Feel free to give it to Councilmember Rambo.
No, I'm sorry, Lauren.
No, don't apologize. This is
I'm a
your
novice.
first second on the new committee. So give her to Rob.
Okay, we'll make Councilmember Rambo the second on this. So, with that, is there any discussion on the motion?
Excuse me, Chair, if I could interject.
Sure.
We do need to open it up for nominations for any other individual who would be interested. According to our council rules, we have to accept nominations from anybody who might be interested in the role.
Sure, absolutely. So, are there any other nominations that anyone wishes to make? Okay, hearing none, then, and are there any discussion on the matter from anyone? All right, with that, then we can then do a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Yes.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes.
Councilmember Flashar.
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano.
Yes, sure, I'll vote for that guy.
Yeah. Councilmember Remy.
The Hobbit says yes.
Councilmember Rambo.
Yes.
And that should cover all the council members we have in attendance.
All right, great. Well, then the motion passes. I do want to express my sincere appreciation for the support. I enjoy doing this, and I really do appreciate your support with that. All right. Moving along, then we shall have the third item on the agenda, the approval of the minutes. These are the minutes from the May 28th meeting. Is there a motion for approval? I see Councilmember Remy's hand up. Anyone else that wishes to make a motion to approve the minutes? Councilmember Edens' hand up. So we have that motion to approve the minutes. Any other items to discuss pertaining to the minutes? Any edits? Any comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All right. The minutes are approved. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move into public participation here. So I do believe there may be some folks that want to speak in reference to a matter on the agenda. So Sam, do you want to explain how that is to be done so they can make themselves known how to that they wish to speak?
Yes, sir. So if anybody who is in the attendee window is as an attendee this evening, if you would like to speak on any item on the agenda, if you could use the raise hand feature in the chat window. So depending on which device you're watching the meeting from, you locate the chat window and then use that blue raise hand feature. I'll be able to call on you. Or if you can't find the raise hand feature, but you do have access to the chat window, just type something in that you'd like to speak, and then I'll be able to allow you to talk.
It looks like we have Teresa stuck in the attendees
I see.
window. Okay. So if there's anybody who would like to speak on any of the items on the agenda, please raise your hand.
Yeah, this would be the time to
There we
speak
go.
if you have any comment that you wish to express, whether it is just a general comment or something in support or opposition to an item on the agenda that the committee should take into consideration.
Barry Haith, first of all. Mr. Haith, you've been added to the meeting, so if you could unmute yourself. There we go.
Everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, first, thanks everyone for the invitation. Mr. Garitano reached out to us and let us know that there were a few items of interest on tonight's agenda. We don't have the agenda, the benefit of the agenda, but we will. We'll note that one of those items relates to the expansion or connection of the what are currently disconnected paths along Old State Road, which is an item of interest, I know, for myself, my family, and for others in our community. We live in the Country Ridge Estates subdivision and have not had a real way to connect ourselves or our children to the amenities of our community. We've lived here for about 20 years now. So we see this as one of the most critical next steps to not only connect us to all of the things we've worked for to advance the city's master plan, but to do so in a way that's safe. And currently the stretch of Old State Road is a very narrow stretch, and it includes uphill, downhill, around the bend, and sometimes a combination of several of those things, which doesn't make it safely traversable to get from here to the town center. So we want to, of course, on behalf of me and my family, and I think there are others in our community and even in other subdivisions adjacent to ours, support this 100%, and of course invite the committee to tell us if there's anything we can do to help you advocate for it along the way. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge Mr. Brown and Mr. Anselm for both working to help us with our connectivity issues. Those relate to communications and the limited communication problems we've had here with our provider. So it's helped, and I think we still have some work to do to help the Hall family, but it's certainly put us in a better position. So thank you both, and Mr. Garitano for that. And with that, I'll cede the floor. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Mr. Haith. I appreciate you coming. I know you're very passionate about the topic here. Thanks again. And this item will be up next right after we complete public participation.
Okay, I have next with their hand up, Mr. Jerry Leaker. So. Mr. Leaker, you have been added. If you could unmute your microphone so we could hear you.
Joe, I got the invitation from you, which I appreciate. Thank you very much. My question is this. I got the email link about the plan for this expansion of the sidewalk, and it includes the drawings of doing the improvements to Old State. So is the plan to theoretically make this path the same as it would have been for that plan?
I think we'll maybe Mr. Brown could answer that question.
Pardon me. So that's part of the, I think the request to the committee tonight is actually to complete conceptual engineering of the project. So we would come out of that effort with a concept plan of of the past, but generally it's anticipated that we would follow what was previously contemplated when they did the study for Old State Road, which is a trail on the north, I want to say north, I guess west side of Old State Road. That answers your question. Hopefully it does.
So and I follow up, would there then be still a tunnel going under Old State to connect to the other side?
So at this point, again, we haven't done the conceptual engineering. So that would be the next meeting, hopefully, if we move forward tonight. I wouldn't envision the tunnel being part of the project. So the work at your subdivision that was completed some time back, a couple of years ago, that would remain in place. We wouldn't remove that. We would take advantage of the fact that it's already been constructed and in place. So then, unfortunately, the thought, at least department's thought at this time, would be the crossing would be at grade at that end of the project where it currently is. We can
Okay.
offline if you have further questions.
So just in general, Joe, I guess I had two thoughts in regards to that. I understand you guys are just looking at this in a conceptual matter, but does that make sense if someday we hope to widen Old State? And then the second part of that would be, Rick, if this would go forward and become an actual project, would you see lighting that crosswalk that's by Vintage Grove now, like they do on Old Manchester at several locations, with the flashing lights and so forth?
As far as the crosswalk at your location, Mr. Leaker, that Old State Road is a county arterial roadway, so it's ultimately under the jurisdiction of St. Louis County. So the decisions about putting the flashing lights unfortunately have to go through St. Louis County. Their policy unfortunately has been not to provide flashing lights at those crosswalks. It's certainly something we could revisit with them separately, regardless of what decision might be made tonight. But in the past, their position has been that they have not favored the use of the flashing lights at grade crosswalks, unfortunately.
Okay.
All right. And yeah, we'll obviously get into more details as we address the topic right after public participation. But thanks, Mr. Leaker. Good to hear from you again. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak?
I see some comments in the chat window from Mr. Cox. I don't know if he would like to be added to the webinar to give his comments verbally, so I will add him. Mr. Cox, you've been added. If you could unmute your microphone.
Maybe Mr. Cox is not able to speak.
Good.
All right. Anybody else? I know Councilmember Clark, you had your hand up, but you'll be able to participate in the discussion when the topic comes up. So this is the opportunity for the public to express any comments.
He
Anyone else?
He did leave a message saying he's unable to speak right now. So
I do see Jason Hall has his hand up.
right. Mr.
Hey,
Hall,
guys.
you've been added.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Joe. Thank you for the invite. I just wanted to second what Barry had mentioned before about the path. That would be really awesome. And I think Barry referenced as well, I think that was part of the discussion today, was about the internet service. And Joe has helped us a lot, raising a lot of noise and getting AT&T to come out, but our internet service, or at least mine, for instance, is still really bad. My daughter was, she's been taking classes from home, and this fall, it looks like my two sons who are in college, who's going to be taking classes from home. I now work from home a lot, and trying to do one Zoom call at a time is very difficult, but now we're going to have up to 4 people at home doing that. So any help with the internet service would be incredible. And that's all I wanted to say today. So again, thank you for having us.
Alrighty.
Thank you,
Chair, I
Mr.
do
Hall.
not see anybody else with their hand raised.
All right. Well, thank you. Looks like then we'll conclude public participation. So I thank again the folks from public participation, and we'll move on to the first item for the committee to discuss, which is under for action, and this is the possible project for TAP federal funding application. This is related to the Old State Road item. All right, Rick.
Thank you, Chair Garitano. Council members, some of you are familiar with this project, those of you that were with us last year. In September, there was a discussion at Edmond Public Works relative to a potential for a future application for federal funding to construct a new shared use path along the west side of Old State Road. We discussed constructing it essentially between Nantucket Meadows Drive on the southwest up to Old State Place. And the goal is to provide continuous pedestrian facilities that would link Old Fairway on the south side essentially with Ridge Road on the north. And of course, we have the two subdivisions primarily on the other side, Fairhaven and Country Estates. Had speaking about those tonight. So there's certainly need to provide some connectivity there to existing subdivisions. And the thought would be to link the trail system from Old Fairway all the way over to Rock Hollow Trail off of Ridge Road with this project. So the fact that it would be constructed on a county arterial roadway that lacks any pedestrian or bike facilities right now, I think is a very strong selling point. There's a definite need for pedestrian or bike facilities in that corridor. So we are now aware that the funding program that we have typically utilized in recent years to construct shared use paths is now out for applications to be submitted. And that is what they call the Transportation Alternatives Program. It's a pot of money through the federal government that is specific to bike and pedestrian improvement projects. And we've been successful in the past tapping into that pot of money. So the deadline for submittal is August 20th. We have a little bit of time, but we need to get started if we're going to move forward with an application by that date. So the main thing that we really need to do, if there's interest in moving forward, is conceptual engineering. We can actually define the cost of the project and further refine the scope of the project. And that will be necessary to submit an application. We have to have a fairly detailed construction cost estimate to submit the application. So I have been in discussion with HR Green, a consultant that worked on the original concept for Old State Road. They have a proposal into me for just under $10,000 to do that work. That is something that our city administrator could authorize, but I am asking essentially for approval to move forward with that work through the committee tonight. Secondly, I did make reference earlier that Old State Road is a county arterial roadway. So we can submit the application only if St. Louis County provides us their concurrence, and we will need a letter of support from the county to submit the application with East West Gateway. So we'll need to move forward in that regard. And I think the other aspect of it is we have asked about the possibility of them sharing in the cost of the local match. So these programs are cost share programs. The maximum match is 80% federal, 20% local. For the initial submittal, we would probably recommend putting in at a 20% level locally. We could ask the county to split that cost with us. After we get through the conceptual engineering, we'll have a better handle on what that cost would be. So really the recommendation to you tonight is to begin the work of the conceptual engineering work through HR Green by executing contract with them for that work. Once they get through it, I would bring it back to this committee for a formal, hopefully a formal recommendation to submit the application by August 20th. With that, I'm available for any questions. And I would like to note And if you haven't already wondered who is on the call, Dan Ron, our newer assistant city engineer, is with us tonight. So he's also available to represent the Department of Public Works if any questions. Dan started with us about the same time the coronavirus hit us back in March. And he's been a welcome addition to the Department of Public Works. And available for any questions that you may have at this time.
I see Councilmember Berlino.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Rick, a couple things, and excuse my ignorance, but who exactly is the East-West Gateway Council of Government? And how much money are we really talking here? If we're gonna sink about 10 grand into a plan, what's the probability of us getting the grant? And if so, will it be enough money to basically do the project?
So, Councilmember Berlino, East-West Gateway is a regional agency. They're an entity that's in place in large part to assist with planning in the region. One of their functions is to oversee the distribution of federal funding to the DOTs, either Illinois or Missouri. So when these funds become available to the local governments in the St. Louis region, East-West Gateway is essentially the gatekeeper. So the applications for us to be considered for those funds go to East-West Gateway. They set the rules for the program and they review all the applications. Now, once the entities are selected, MoDOT actually administers the program, or it could be another agency, frankly, but typically it's MoDOT that actually administers the funds. But East-West Gateway is kind of the gatekeeper of the process, at least as far as the application goes. The $10,000, frankly, is fairly typical. Hire an engineer, to have them work for 2 or 3 weeks to come up with a cost estimate, look at those unknowns that we just don't have any answers, and put together a plan on paper that gets submitted with the application. And the idea, and typically it does work quite well. If we spend the money up front, we will come up with a fairly good cost estimate, and usually that carries through the project. This past experience has been fairly successful in that regard. We come up with a good cost estimate now, based on their work and our best engineering judgment. We would bring it back to you. I don't know exactly what we're talking about as far as an order of magnitude. I think you're probably around the $1 million mark for this project. Could be a little more. I don't really know. And I wouldn't want to go after much more than about $1 million at this point. It is a competitive program, and I think this is a very good project. It should score very highly. But at the end of the day, it's a very competitive project, and they always get more applications than are successful.
Any other council members, or Councilmember Berlino, did you have anything before we move on?
No, thanks, Joe.
All right, Councilmember Remy.
I'm sorry, Joe, I can't find the hand raise thing on my screen.
I'll just take names. If you just, I've got you down now. So if you just want to, and I'll just say that this is our first time doing Zoom as a committee, but if you just wave your hand like this, then I'll put you on the list. So I've got Councilmember Remy, Edens, and Rambo.
So just a couple of questions. So I remember this meeting, this was from, I believe you said September of last year. I think, Joe, that was the one you weren't there. And I think Dave Bertolino stepped in as the chair of that meeting. If I remember correctly, at that meeting, we postponed to get a cost analysis directly from HR Green on the project. And I'm just trying to think through this right now. The timing, obviously, last year at this time versus this year are two different climates right now for economic. I'm a little bit worried about the idea that 20% of local split even at 10%, if this is over $1 million, is going to cost the city over $100,000. And I'm not questioning the merits of this project. I think it's certainly needed. And I'm actually not being facetious by saying this, but I'm being direct. we need these sorts of sidewalks in Ward 3 on Stryker Road, where there is not the spacing that's delineated in the map that's provided. And I'm a little bit worried that we have not addressed that in Public Works yet with a proposal to address those issues for folks, because we've got discontinuity of the actual sidewalk system on Stryker Road. And for folks that are aware, you see on Sundays, Saturdays, bikers who are going to get hit by cars. I'm a little bit nervous of spending over $100,000 in the current economic climate right now, even with excellent funding, without addressing perhaps more pressing needs at the moment. So I'd love to hear from the Councilmember Gaetano and the fact that why didn't HR Green up to this point give us that cost analysis as requested September of 2019?
So, yeah, and thanks. I do remember September 19. I was at the Municipal League Conference when I missed this meeting. I might have to ask Rick regarding the HR Green part of the question. I do think that you probably are right that there are as well other needs. This is a need that I've been advocating for several years. And as Rick mentioned, we had already put forth a plan for Old State Road several years ago. And it was a more comprehensive plan several years ago, but it was a plan that we tried to seek funding allocated by the East-West Gateway Council. And this would have done not only the trails, but it would have also improved the road itself with turn lanes, roundabouts, basically Old State from Pierside Lane all the way to Old Fairway Drive. So we, looking at when we found out from East West that that plan was not accepted, the attention then diverted to focusing on the most important need at this time, which is the lack of connectivity between sidewalks there. And given the narrowness of the road, it's an important gap that needs to be filled, because we have these families with children that want to access the rest of the trails in Wildwood. They want to feel connected to Wildwood. Right now, there's that disconnect. Unfortunately, I don't know why Ward 3 never made it a priority, maybe in your predecessor, why it was ever brought up. And I'm glad that you're bringing it up today. I think it's a good thing, but it just never got to where, we've been advocating, like where we are with this piece of the road. So I do think it needs to be there. It's I guess maybe Rick, you can answer more about the HR Green piece.
Well, the HR Green simply is just a matter of that I have not called them and said, I want you to start. I didn't envision starting that work until just before the application was out. Originally, I thought typically this comes out much earlier, like December, January timeframe. So I didn't think it would be much past that point. It was delayed this year, I suspect because of COVID-19. So I didn't want to start that work until I knew the program was coming out. Otherwise, it just didn't make sense to me to do the work unless I knew the funding program was out. So I waited until this time. But as I said, I had the proposal. It's under $10,000. We can start that work essentially tomorrow, assuming there's a desire to do that amongst the committee. As far as Stryker, let me make a couple points. Now, and all these federal funding programs through East-West Gateway, the money doesn't become available for construction typically until 3 years after this point. So the way that usually works, next year would be money available for engineering, then right-of-way acquisition followed by construction. So I don't envision construction of this project occurring still for a good 3 years. As far as Stryker, as you know, we do have under the capital improvements program, we do have a project for Stryker Road that we are working in Public Works on right now. So that's a separate project. It is funded under the capital improvements program currently, and it is being worked on.
So just to follow up just real fast, Councilmember, this is not the first time we brought up Stryker. This has been over a year. I brought the same thing up. But the Stryker project that's ongoing is not addressing, as far as I can tell, last time we discussed, the area that's discontinuous in my ward. I think it's an area different on Stryker Road. So I just want to be clear. So the other thing I was going to say is I'm fully supportive of the project. I'm just a little, so I want to understand then, if this gets funded, when would we be allocating funds if this is going to be a 3-year project? Just because allocating 10 or 20%, if you will, depending on how we split this with the county, is this going to be funding that we're going to be budgeting for 2021? Or is this going to be budgeted to start for funding being our expenditures being used in 2022 or 2023?
So Councilmember Remy, I would have more information relative to that at the next meeting, but as I said, construction funds are typically programmed a good 3 years hence. So I would expect that the project, if it was selected, wouldn't be constructed till 2024 likely, possibly 2023, but with the right-of-way, my anticipated right-of-way requirements on this project, the schedule that I would envision would be engineering in 2021, right-of-way acquisition in 2022, maybe construction in 2023 or 2024. So if we requested 20% local match, you can do that for all 3 phases of the project. So there could be some expenditures for engineering in the first year, right-of-way acquisition in the second and third years potentially, and then construction the following year. But the big cost would be construction, and that would be at least 3 years away.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Councilmember Edens, you're up next.
Yes, this 10,000 is covered in the consultant line item budget, right? It's not dipping out of reserve.
That is correct. I would fund that, and I typically fund it out of other engineering services, out of that budget item.
Well, I'm going to support this tonight, and I think what you're hearing kind of expressed is there has been frustration as the fiscal situation has tightened, certainly not only here, but globally. We have seen projects that have already been slated and queued get delayed. And so I think the concern is about adding one more thing when there's already other projects that are continually getting delayed. And how do we look at funding and anticipating the costs, even if we do get grant money, the next several years in a row? So I'm going to anticipate that this, as indicated tonight, that cost is going to be spread out long term. Certainly some grant money is better than no grant money. And once we have this design for $9,000, if we don't get the grant money, we still have that design when we do have money to fund the project separately down the road. So that's where I'm at with this, and that's why I'll be supporting it.
Councilmember Rambo.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions for Mr. Brown. I'll just give them to you all at once. And then I had a comment about a separate point. The questions I have, I may have missed this, but I'd like to know the total distance that we're trying to build here on with this trail. And I want to make 100% clear in my own mind that this connects to the Wildwood, this will then connect the Wildwood trail system. There won't be another gap. It doesn't dead end anywhere. The last question is about the TAP program in general. Is that sort of a single threaded process, or where we have a project, we get approved, they pay it off, and then we can submit a proposal for another project? Or is there a particular frequency? Can we submit another project every year? Can we submit multiple projects? How exactly does that work? Because we've got a lot of trails, and if we can get all but 10 or 20% of it paid for, it might make some sense. So can you answer those questions, please?
I will do my best, yes. So as far as the frequency, we've been, my experience since I've been with the city, we've been pretty good about submitting projects under the federal funding every year annually. So not always successful, but we've always made an effort. Sometimes we've made multiple efforts per round. I'll have to check the requirements for this one. I don't know that there's any, typically there is not a requirement that you cannot put in for 2 projects at a given time. The reality is there may be some requirements they will not select more than 1, but the reality is you're not going to get more than 1 for sure, and the pot is limited. So, and it is very competitive, but we have put in some occasions for multiple projects in funnel round. I can double check that we can do that for this one. I'm sorry, what was the other question?
The total distance that we're considering here, and whether it actually connects to the Wildwood Trail system, because I couldn't see that for sure on the documents that I looked at.
So the intention would be, yes, to connect to the southwest, to the sidewalks, essentially there at Nantucket Meadows Drive, and then follow along the north or west side of Old State, all the way up to Old State Place, and tie into the sidewalks there. There's already a sidewalk from Old State Place north and that west side of Old State up to Ridge Road. Essentially, there's a sidewalk all the way to Rock Hollow Trail. So this would fill the gap. It would tie the sidewalks essentially on the north and the south that are already in place right now. And as far as the length, I know I can tell you that after we do the conceptual engineering.
Looks like a couple tenths maybe of a mile.
If you give me a second, I can probably measure it pretty quick in Google Maps.
Okay. So in the meantime, I'm going to roll on with my other comment because I think it's important for future reference. And maybe it's just I'm the only one ignorant of the actual issues here, but I'm a cyclist. I've been a cyclist for many years, and the way the law generally reads is that a cyclist has to be riding on as close as practical to the edge of the traveled roadway, I think is the way it's written, which means you have to be actually on the road, not on the shoulder, not on the sidewalk, and you're in trouble if you're on a sidewalk. You're not supposed to be riding a bike on the sidewalk, but kids are going to ride bikes on the sidewalks. That's as it should be, but I'm wondering if we make any distinction between the sidewalk system and the trail system, or if we hop back and forth between trail, sidewalk, that's a confusion factor for serious cyclists versus kids. Can you speak to that at all?
And that's a good point, and it's something that's been on my mind, frankly, is the connectivity north and south. Might be a little bit premature to get too much into that discussion now,
Sure.
But I think it's something we need to think about. There's a kind of a balance in my mind between, the ultimate goal in the corridor would be to have a shared use path connecting all points north and south. So all the way from Old Fairway, the trail down that Old Fairway, all the way up to Ridge Road, and that tie into sidewalks essentially. So at some point, those areas that have sidewalks would be upgraded to a full trail. The question is, how much of that would we want to do now? Maybe we could look at doing that work to the south and at least have it continuous to the south, but maybe not to the north, if that makes sense. But there's going to be
we should state an approach or state a general policy so that it's clear. And just to follow on to that, the Stryker Road issue, is that a gap in the sidewalk, or is there some sort of a trail there? Does TAP consider sidewalk work as well as trail system work? And we could maybe take advantage of some of those funds for Stryker as well. Can you shed any light on that?
So absolutely, the TAP program is available for bike and pedestrian improvements. Sidewalks are certainly eligible. Shared use paths, bike facilities on roads that lack them. So Stryker Road, where we're lacking sidewalks or bike facilities, is certainly a candidate and could be considered. Depending on where the project is, again, we would have to do some conceptual engineering so we could define the scope of the project and complete a cost estimate in advance of submitting the application.
Does anyone know the length of the gap there in Stryker? Can you, do you have any thoughts on that?
I could try to do the Google Map approach as well. Let me just give me a second. But as you were talking about it, no, there's no paths or bike paths or certainly any trail system at all in the ward at all for that, in Ward 3 at least, for that component.
So it's all sidewalks.
It's all sidewalk, and there's a lack of sidewalk across, unfortunately.
So is it half mile or a tenth of a mile? Can you? I mean, I'm just looking for ballpark.
If we're talking about the discontinuity of the small part of the sidewalk, it's definitely less. It's going to be maybe less than 2/10 of a mile. If you're talking about a lack of sidewalk, and it's going to be well over a mile. We just don't have sidewalk. We don't have a sidewalk at all. So you can't go from Point Clayton over to Elegant Child. There's nothing on that side at all.
Just want to make sure the topic is for this item here.
Sure,
So
I'm sorry.
We deviate. Yeah, we're not on the agenda for that topic. It wouldn't be fair to the folks that are advocating for the other network.
Well, point of order, it is actually germane, because we're making a decision for funding specifically on what we're going to fund, and we're allocating funds, and Dr. Rambo brought up the concept of, could these TAP funds be allocated across for additional projects?
Yeah, it's just that if we're getting into an agenda topic like talking about that trail, then it should be on the agenda. So I think the question about cost or funding is probably okay, but just trying to keep us aligned.
Okay.
As far as the length of this project, I'm coming up with around 2,500 feet to 2,700 feet.
Oh.
All right, is that it? Okay, I didn't see any other hands up. Are there any other comments? All right, I guess what I'll just add in is just some comments of my own. As I shared earlier, this is an item that I've heard frequently from the residents along this section here. Also, something that impacts not only Ward 8, but Ward 7, because the section of Old State Road that we're talking about, one side of Old State is Ward 7, so Councilmember Flasher's area. The other side is Ward 8. We have several neighborhoods that lead up to Old State Road, Country Ridge Estates, Vintage Grove, Crown Point Estates, which is off of Ridge, off of Old State, Nantucket, Lake Chesterfield, Brighton Place, the enclaves at Cherry Hills, Fairhaven Estates. So quite a number of neighborhoods that would directly benefit from the work here. I don't know if Councilmember Rambo, if you got the answer to your question before, but doing this work will also connect to an existing trail network on both ends. So the end that is closest to Old Fairway would connect to an existing city-maintained trail through the enclaves at Cherry Hills. That trail takes people into through the enclaves at Cherry Hills, and then connects with the trails that are along Highway 100 over there, where you can head westbound, basically all the way to 109 and further west, and then connect to go up to the community park. The opposite end of the connection here would bring this bring the residents to the also city maintained trails, which is the Rock Hollow Trail or the Zombie Road Trail. So again, that's why I hear that a lot from the folks, because they have access to these, well, not access, but these beautiful trails that are nearby, but we don't have the best direct access. And if you're familiar, we're driving through Old State Road, there's a portion that becomes very narrow. You have a ridge line of trees on both ends. And that's where you have folks that, you know, taking a major risk going through there. There isn't even a shoulder, I think, for cars when you're going through that section there. So I would appreciate the support that we at least see where this comes up with from a design and cost perspective. the East-West Gateway. These are TAP funds, Transportation Alternative Program funds, that cities like Wildwood and everyone else is applying. If Wildwood doesn't apply it, that money's going to go to somebody else. And while I don't know what this project will cost, it may be $1 million. I don't know. I'm just throwing a number. I don't know if that's the number. Wildwood's share would be that 20 to 10% figure, I guess, 200,000 to 100,000. So in essence, we're saying no to free money. We're saying no to $800,000 that the East-West Gateway is willing to give us of federal and state funds. So we have an opportunity, and I think we need to address the other opportunities in the city. Everyone here in this committee or everyone in this council, if there is something that, is a project that needs to be done, fight for it and bring it forth. And, we can certainly look into it. But I know this one's been on the list for quite some time. Councilmember Bertolino.
I'd like to move that we approve the recommendation of the Director of Public Works and move forward with HR Green's design.
A second by Councilmember Flasher. Okay, any questions or any comments on the debate? All right, hearing none, we'll do a voice vote here. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any
Aye.
abstentions? Any oppose? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. All right, moving on to the next part of the agenda here. We have, let's see, the number 2, the increased contract authorization for construction of Manchester Road Streetscape Project Phase 3. Rick, you want to go ahead?
Yes, sure.
Or-
Thank you, Ricardo. Appreciate that. Council members, this next item is relative to the Manchester Road Shared Use Path Project, Manchester Road Streetscape Project that is currently under construction. And some of you were in the council at the time. In February of 2019, the City Council approved Ordinance 2444, which authorized the agreement with construction to build the project, the Manchester Road Streetscape Project Phase 3. And that cost, their low bid was just under $2.2 million. The project is underway right now. It's to construct a streetscape from Atherton Road down to the roundabout at Taylor Road. It was budgeted in the 2019 Capital Projects Fund for a cost of $3.2 million. As you probably know, the project includes on-street parking, storm sewers, curbs and gutters, 10-foot wide sidewalks, street lighting, bike lanes, and landscaping with street trees. We also applied for a federal grant to construct the streetscape project. I think it was back in 2016, and we were successful in that effort. So we requested at that time 50% of the construction cost, or $1.3 million. So we do have $1.3 million of a federal grant that is helping to reimburse the cost to construct this project. So under the Ordinance 2444, Public Works included a contingency for additional work or change orders, as we typically do on all construction projects. At that time, the contingency amount that we included was $250,000. Thus, the maximum amount authorized for Gershenson and the Public Works Department under that bill, or under the Ordinance 2444, is just over $2.4 million. So at this time, with construction, we have authorized just under $223,000 of additional work through change orders to the original contract with Gershenson. And while the project is nearing completion, we have identified at this point potentially another $262,000 of additional work that could be completed. However, to do that work, we will exceed the authorization under Ordinance 2444. So essentially what the department is asking tonight is to increase the authorization under the original Ordinance 2444 to account for this additional work. And I do want to point out a good half of the increase is due to a request by Three French Hens to modify their access to their site. The owner, as you heard last night at City Council, has requested that we construct an additional entrance, essentially move their current driveway at the center of their site, eliminate the center driveway, and construct 2 new driveways at the outside of the site along the property lines. So that work is rather significant in cost, and it's about half of the additional request or additional work that remains to be completed. So again, the recommendation from Public Works is to increase the contract authorization by just under $245,000 to $2,650,000, which will allow Gershenson to complete the project per the plans and incorporate the additional work that has been requested. And with that, I'm available for any questions from the committee tonight.
Before we begin, I did get a message from the owner of Three French Hens, Jeannie Hood, just before the meeting started. She had intended to comment tonight during public participation. However, she is unable to due to a death in the family. And also, I believe she's also got a commitment with potentially another meeting tonight. So she has been busy. And so with that, Rick, she did not get a chance to look at the, I guess you must have sent her the plans because she said she was attending to the death issue today. But she will want to look at them and talk with you about it. She had some questions about the new plan, I think pertaining to it. So I think that's just helpful information. And Rick, we might need your opinion on how we should proceed with that, knowing that there are still some questions regarding that proposal. And I think just some context, as Ms. Hood had contacted me about this, her main complaint with the way the driveway is graded now is that the delivery trucks that she gets into her facility, they're 55-foot trailers. She has said that they will not pull into her property because of the grade. And concern about the truck potentially even tipping over at the angle that it's coming in. And that was not a concern previously with the way the driveway was before the construction started. So that has been her main concern with that there. She did say also that the fire department had looked at it as well. And she said there were concerns with that, but I did want to just pass along those comments that she had shared with me. Okay, any hands up from anyone? Council Member Edens.
So what I have pictured in my mind is that probably when the road was being expanded, that it was at a higher level than it was previously, and then her business is below, and this created a steeper incline just by pouring the new section of concrete. Was that correct?
More or less, that's correct. The road is essentially constructed along a ridge line. So when we have widened it as we have done, we're pushing out the template of the road.
Okay.
And what happens is in some cases, the driveways are steeper in the after condition.
So I would imagine besides just the tractor trailer issue, which then becomes a public safety issue, if someone's stopping to unload, then you're going to have passing. So we also might want to consider while this situation is being remedied, that we offer some sort of police or traffic support when there is an unloading issue. I'm sure that her customers may be bottoming out as well if they have, lower vehicles. I'm wondering, how this didn't show up in design as an issue. I get that the road was made to standards and ticked all the boxes, but it sort of didn't pass the common sense meter in this particular section. So my question is, why are we paying for it and not the subcontractor that we used to design it? I get that it was built to engineering standards. However, we were failed to be notified that this would create an undue burden on an existing business and would result in a change order of significant cost, the cost of a lot of the sidewalk Stryker improvements that we've had to, have bounced around. So do we not have some sort of clawback that they are liable for this problem? Why is this coming out of our budget if the issue was with the design?
Well, I think those are good questions. And I guess the way I would respond to that is essentially the costs, you almost have to look at it from the standpoint of, we're giving her 2 entrances instead of 1. We're adding an extra entrance. And that's primarily where the cost is coming in. And when we negotiated with the property owners on that project, we had 30 owners that we had to knock on their door and get easements to construct the project. She was one of them. 3 French Hens was one of them. We did need a small amount of permanent easement to construct our project. So we did have to negotiate with her at that time to acquire that easement. And when that process was underway, our consultant did meet with her about the use of the site and asked her about her truck deliveries. And the answer we got at the time was they didn't have the largest of the overroad trucks using the site. Well, lo and behold, that's exactly what is occurring now. And I don't know if it was occurring before. It was not provided to us that that was occurring. And our engineer said that he didn't believe it was possible. In fact, it is very difficult, regardless of the driveway configuration, to get the large trucks around that site. So we were told they weren't using them. So we were just as surprised as anybody to find that they were actually bringing in deliveries of these. These are over the road trucks to make a small delivery to her facility. So it's a challenging situation, but I think we made the attempt, our engineer made the attempt. He did ask the question, and I think we even have it documented, but the answer was they don't use what we call the WB67 truck. So I don't cast blame on our engineer in this regard. This was something that's come up, unfortunately, after the fact. And she's right, these over the road trucks are making deliveries now. So if we can improve the access to the site, it would be, if we'd known it in advance when we were negotiating for the easement, I believe we probably would have come to the same conclusion at that time as is being recommended tonight, to add 1 more driveway to her site.
So my follow-up question was, did she specifically ask for an additional driveway, or was this just the best engineering solution? Why was regrading not a cheaper option?
Well, we recommended initially, it was our recommendation to try to utilize the driveway in the center of the site and flatten the grade as much as possible. So we've got it at a point where the gradient is flat enough for the fire trucks. It's what's there right now. If you drive it tomorrow, that's more or less the gradient of the center driveway would be it if we finish it up. So it does work, and it should work for the large trucks, frankly. The problem we're getting is it really becomes a driver's decision as to whether they want to use the driveway or not. And I think they make a risk assessment based on their experience, based on how much they're unloading, as to whether they want to take the time to maneuver in and around her site, because it does take them time to do it. They would just as soon not do it, frankly. They would rather unload in the street if possible. So it's a challenging situation to deal with these trucks. And certainly when we do want to support our local businesses as best we can.
Okay, so just to recap, based on the information that you collected at the time, it does not represent the current situation that was fed into the schematics that basically produced this design. And the situation has changed now with the types of trucks. So I am hearing conflicting information with what Councilmember Garitano said, that the fire department has voiced that they are uncomfortable with it. I don't know if something changed after you've done some work with regrading, so I would like it in writing from the fire department or some form of communication through our city administrator about whether or not they are comfortable, in fact, with the current situation. And it's unfortunate that there's
Video, if you'd like to see it of the trucks going in and out of the driveway. I can provide that to you tomorrow if you'd like to see the video.
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I'd mention that Ms. Hood mentioned is that the 55-foot long trailers that she gets her deliveries, it sounded like, based on what she had told me, that they've been getting these truck deliveries all this time. And I also have to go back to that this was once a lumber yard. So they were getting deliveries at the lumber yard. So I don't know what kind of trucks they were delivering, but that I know has been something that I had heard. All right, who else? Councilmember Bertolino, I see your hand up. Was there another hand? All right, Councilmember Bertolino, please go ahead.
Yeah, you get extra points, Joe, if you can name the lumberyard.
You know, I don't know. I feel like it was named after the interstate or something. Oh,
It was Hillbean, wasn't it? Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. Rick, does Jeannie have any other access, like to a neighboring property or something, that instead of spending all this money to change the front, what if we put money into another access off of, a neighboring driveway or whatever? Is that even a possibility?
I don't believe that's a possibility because of the configuration of the lot. And I mean, if you had access rights, potentially that could be done, but I don't really see that as being feasible at this point in time.
Councilmember Edens.
I just expressed some concern because I know that Jeannie wanted to kind of be here to advocate for herself, and I'm not able to address some of her concerns if I don't understand that she's had the time to approve the design that she asked to have time for, so would the most appropriate thing then be to move this forward with the caveat that she kind of has to look at this and say, I'm okay with this as the property owner first? Or just come back to this at the next Public Works meeting? I mean, are we on a time crunch where we can go ahead and allocate for everything else but this?
Just to be clear, the request from the department is not specific to the issue of the driveways, but it's to increase the authorization. If we have the increased authorization and the council wants us to move forward with the negotiations with Jeannie Hood, we can do that. If you don't approve the authorization, we simply cannot move forward with that effort with Jeannie Hood. So we have to increase the authorization, and we really need to do it tonight because Gershenson needs to continue with their progress on the project to complete it by the deadline that they're planning to complete it by.
And Rick, knowing that she's got some questions regarding that, her portion of what we're talking about here, is that still allow, obviously you can answer her questions, but I just wanted to make sure that, we don't move forward and then we have to revisit the issue. I mean, is it a concern for you, Rick, or do you think what would be your guidance to this committee?
Well, again, the request is to approve the increase in the authorization. I believe Sam is on the meeting. The next step, if the committee approves it, would be to take the full request to City Council at the next City Council meeting. In between that time, we would certainly have more opportunity to meet with Jeannie to go over the plan and confirm that the plan is acceptable. If not, we'll look to make changes as best we can. My hope is that the amount of authorization is plenty to allow us to incorporate the new driveway and make that change. If it is not, I will have to come back at a subsequent time and potentially ask for additional monies. But my hope and my expectation is we've included enough in the request to cover it.
And Rick, can you maybe elaborate a little bit more? I was looking at the other items on the change order. It said additional sidewalk for parcel 3, the Klebold property. Um, I'm confused seeing that there. Like, don't they already have a sidewalk as part of this project?
That was, yes, Councilmember Garitano, that was a small change to address the sidewalk directly to the front of that building. We added some sidewalk, we removed some of his existing sidewalk instead of leaving it in place per his request. So that was a rather minor addition that we would like to make. That would be part of this additional authorization, as you noted.
And then regarding the sign, is that typical, like, or why is it now a change order?
It is a change order in the way that we, from the standpoint of when we negotiated with the community church to obtain the permanent easement and temporary easements that were necessary, the agreement that we came to was they donated the easements in exchange for the city to reconstruct their sign in front of the church. Based on the time that that agreement was made, it was too late to incorporate those details into the plan set because we had to go to planning and zoning and get approval on the basically the type and size of the sign. So I didn't have those details ready for the bid letting to include in the project. So we had planned all along to do it as a change order to the original construction project.
All right, any other comments or questions from the committee? Councilmember Farmer, and I see Councilmember Edens.
I was just going to say, I think if it's possible, what I'd like to do is make a motion to go with Rick's recommendation with a bit of a caveat. Like I have some pretty significant concerns that this, I'm all for helping businesses and things, but that seems like an incredible improvement to a property for something that all of a sudden appears to have cropped up based on the data that we have. I mean, that's not, I'm not saying anybody's doing anything wrong. It just seems kind of odd. So I think if we have an opportunity to get all of this information and we can discuss it with the council, it sounds like there's other things that need to get moved forward on this thing besides the driveway issue. So I think we need to kind of keep that train rolling. That's a big project that we need to get done so we can get some other stuff going. But I think it's going to take some conversation to fully understand what's going on. Because I mean, I'm looking at it on Google Maps. Even if it's a slight grading issue, like this is the way that property has been set up for a very, very long time. I don't know why all of a sudden this would create a problem. It seems odd. So that would be my motion. I think we go with Rick's, suggestion. We move this thing forward. We get that information and we take it to the council and figure out what we're doing.
Councilmember Bertolino, is that a second? It is a second. All right, so we have a motion on the floor by Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Bertolino. Any other discussion on the motion? Councilmember Edens, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm just gonna, when we send it to council, I'm still just gonna need a little bit, I don't totally understand, the number 5, the sign at the community church. How did that add up to $55,000? That seems unusually high compared to the rest of the line items. So I just need help picturing that, understanding why the cost is what it is and why it's doing it all.
Councilmember, I didn't bring details of the sign with me. I can provide those certainly at a later date. It is a custom sign that has been designed for the church, as most businesses have throughout the city. It is a good sized sign. So the cost, hopefully on the high side that we have estimated there, but it's the cost to fabricate it. It's a specialty sign. It has to be fabricated, shipped, and then installed. So it has power run to it as well. So there are costs to install it, to build the foundation, to run the electric to the sign to power it, and then actually fabricate and place the sign as well. So it does add up pretty quickly. As I said, hopefully we can get that cost down. We're looking to get additional bids in from other sign fabricators as well. So my hope is the cost is conservative and it comes down from the amount quoted.
And remind me again, this is because we changed, I'm trying to remember this from another council meeting. This is where we moved their sign to make room for the road, and that's why this is happening.
Correct. Our sidewalk is going right through the path, the current location of their sign. So the sign can be removed. Here
is my thought. I would not replace it for a sign that would be, quote, worth more than the current sign that exists. So if you have a Jeep, you replace a Jeep. If they want an upgrade to a Maserati sign that's bigger and better than the one they had before, they have to pay the cost difference. Otherwise, I'm buying a private religious institution an upgraded sign that no one else has the opportunity to do simply because we have caused an inconvenience. We've moved it and we've forced the issue. But if it's bigger, if it's better, if it's drastically different from the one that exists, they need to pay the cost difference for the quality of improvement.
Maybe Rick, did they give any property, as an easement to the city as a result of this? And were they compensated for that property or?
To be clear, the church donated their easements to the city for the construction of the project. And again, with Jeannie Hood, she did the same. She donated the easements. So the thought was to relocate and place a new sign in lieu of the donation by the church. So the agreement does stipulate the style of sign that is proposed to be installed. So I think we're bound by that agreement at this point in time.
But Rick, too, maybe for the committee's benefit, because I recall when this project, and in other projects too, there are times when we've acquired easements where we have paid for them. And it sounds like with these two properties that we're talking about, they were donated.
They were donated. There was no payment made at all to these two property owners for the easements. So with the church, we were going to compensate them essentially by installing the new sign.
But you have had other properties where we've actually paid for easement. Is that correct or not?
Correct. And then some we've done a combination of. Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
As a point of information, just hypothetically, would the easement have been more than $50,000 that was donated or under?
I don't have that figure in front of me, but I would guess it was probably less than $50,000.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah.
I would point out to you that most of these businesses, when you're negotiating with property owners, it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. But the reality is, and especially when it comes to Jeannie Hood, these businesses are dealing with construction over many months. It is a difficult situation for them during construction. There's other claims they can make relative to damages potentially. So whether you can get a property owner to sign on the line through agreement, where you can come to terms with them and support them, I think that's a positive rather than we have avoided condemnation on projects so far in the city of Wildwood. I don't know if that will continue, but we certainly have avoided it so far. So there's a lot that goes into these decisions. Ultimately, to get the property owners to sign on the dotted line. I would say when we did this project, the mindset initially was to ask for donations. And I think we've gotten away from that, maybe more towards outright offering money for easements up front. And to keep it simpler, I think that's a better approach. And that's what we're doing on the Manchester Shared Use Path project, is to try to stay with money for compensation only. And it just keeps it a lot cleaner, and eliminates something like this from occurring, frankly. So there's no question what the compensation is and the value of it.
Thank you for clarifying that. I'm just worried about, I understand the deal that was made. I get why it seemed good at the time, but it's a flag to me in my mind when government is spending on an upgrade for a religious institution, even if it's because we moved the sign in the first place. It's just, to me, that's an issue. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments? All right. So we have a motion on the floor. We'll try this with a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Opposed.
Okay, we have one opposed. Any abstain? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. All right, moving on then, we have the next item on the agenda. Let me just get this here in front of me. All right, we're into the administration portion of the agenda for information. This first item, Wildwood City flag proposal. It was brought to City Administrator Anselm, who informed me that Trey Trapani has a resident of the city would like to bring forth the proposal that City Administrator Anselm feels would be a very good and community engagement opportunity. Sam, do you want to say anything else, or?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Council members, appreciate the opportunity to have Trey give a presentation. Had conversations, as you're aware, Trey is doing an internship with Mayor Bolin. And as a result of some conversations between the two of them, I was notified of a particular interest that Trey has in vexillology, which is the study and the practice of flags. So if you're a fan of Big Bang Theory, you'll remember Sheldon Cooper as a big vexillologist. So anyway, this topic is something that I think is worth a discussion. Obviously, in light of many of the conversations that are taking place around the country regarding the flag for the state of Mississippi forever, for example, there are some opportunities there for that state and other cities that are currently undergoing, an analysis or review of their city flags to see if there's an opportunity to make some improvements. So, in conversation with the mayor and Mr. Trapani, they suggested perhaps bringing this to the Admin Public Works Committee first, and then depending on the feedback that we get from this group, we can take the next step. So, I would like to introduce Trey Trapani, and I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, City Manager Anselm, and thank you, Administration and Public Works Committee, for hearing what I had to say today. Essentially, what I'm proposing is that the City of Wildwood looks into beginning the process of getting a new flag for the city. I do know that we have a current flag right now. However, it's oh, hold on. I'm very sorry. I'm having a little bit of a technology issue sharing my screen here. Do apologize. This is our current flag here. It's very basic. I don't think it evokes very much about what the city is all about. I'm not sure how the council feels about this. However, that's my personal thoughts on the flag. I think as humans, we're very much drawn to putting ideas into smaller, more visual concepts. And in a state or a government, the best way to express this is with a flag. One of the best flags, I think, that does a very good job of evoking imagery, emotion, and ideas would be the flag of the United Kingdom. Now, to me, I think of the Queen, the Beatles, and tall red buses. I'm not sure what it evokes to you. However, when you see this flag, you see beyond the colors, the pattern, and the design of it, you see a country. What you associate with that country is not necessarily the same for everybody, but you see beyond what is in that flag. Flags have a very strong power to evoke emotion in people. I feel as though with the flag we have right now, we lose that. As the city administrator brought up, the state of Mississippi has gone through some controversy. This is the flag proposed for them. I had reservations about showing the old flag for reasons. There had been a push for a while to get it because, again, it evoked very strong emotions in people. Those weren't necessarily good, but flags do have the power to evoke emotion of hopefully pride, and in some cases, we'll say less than pride. Another example would be the flag of the city of Chicago in Illinois. This flag is very well designed. It follows the North American Vexillological Association rules on what a good flag would look like. More than that, it's a source of pride, of positive pride for the city of Chicago. It's often flown in concert with both the national and state flag. Oftentimes in funerals for police officers in the city of Chicago, the flag of Chicago is draped over the casket instead of the city or state flag. Now, granted, I don't think Wildwood is Chicago. I feel like not being a big city is a big part of our appeal. However, I think it's important to learn from cities like that who have a very bustling and vibrant environment. I would say Wildwood does in a certain respect. We have both an urban center and a rural population. I feel as though our flag right now does not do a very good job of representing that. If you will allow me to show the rules I talked about with the North American Vexillological Association, and see how, we'll say, sorry again about this, how we might compare this flag of the city of Wildwood with it. Now, rule number 1 is keep it simple. The flag should be so simple that a child can draw it from memory. Our flag isn't very intricate, however, it's a little bit crammed. Use meaningful symbolism. Colors pattern should relate to what it symbolizes. I'm not sure what this is supposed to be representing on here. It would appear to be our city seal and the logo of our city's government on top of a white background. It wouldn't be recognizable per se from a distance of 100 feet, which is the main purpose. You should be able to recognize a flag from a distance. 3 basic colors on the flag which contrast well with each other and come from the standard color set. Again, we do follow that rule. However, I feel as though we could do better on that front. Most importantly, never use writing or any kind of organization seal. This is just a seal on a white background. It might represent what the city government had intended for the flag to look like. A few years ago, especially at the time of annexation of a few of the other cities around here. However, it doesn't really evoke very much to me. I would be interested in hearing any thoughts on this a little bit later in this. Be distinctive or be related. Avoid duplicating flags, but use similarities to show connection. This is frankly not a very distinctive flag. Most municipal governments have a flag similar to this, whether it's the city seal or the city's name on a white background. We don't really have anything to differentiate ourselves. And I think as the city of Wildwood, we do deserve to be differentiated from a lot of other cities. We've ranked very high in the nicest places to live in Missouri. We receive a lot of incoming newer families due to the fact that we have a very nice city. I think that we should, just as we stand out as a city, our flag should stand out. I would direct you to what is voted the worst flag in America as an example of what we should not do. It's the flag of Pocatello, Idaho. It's, as you can see, it has more than 3 colors. It's covered in lettering. It's again, a white background with the city logo on it and has even smaller print on it. I'm not saying Wildwood is certainly, is that chaotic and jumbled, but it is certainly approaching that. I think as we are a distinctive city with a very unique identity, with a very vibrant suburban life, I think we need a flag to reflect that. In the time of the COVID outbreak, a lot of people are kept in their homes and they're very much not connected to the city of Wildwood. I think something we could do to not only harness the creative energy of the residents who are cooped up in their own homes. Not only that, we could also get public participation behind something. I believe to replace the flag of the city of Wildwood, we should hold a citizens contest to design a new one. I have personally designed one, however, that I'm not going to even talk about that until we've gotten at least some interest from the council and the government here. I believe that by allowing citizens to submit a flag, not only would it give us a better flag for the city, it would also give even more pride about a flag to the citizenry. This would get more citizens in government, have them paying more attention to what goes on directly in their own backyards. It would also provide an opportunity for them to vote on something, whether that be on social media, whether that be, again, I do not work in the government. This isn't my final call. However, I do think it would be very good if we allowed our own citizens to design or propose a design for the flag. I would like to thank you for listening to me here, and I'm willing to take any questions or comments you have now.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Trapani, for your presentation here, and very interesting topic here tonight. I've never thought of, considering changing the flag up, but it's certainly something that there may be some folks might have an opinion about. Mm-hmm. So for this item here, it is right now we've got it under for information. So certainly, we've got, we can entertain some discussion, and then if the committee wants to pursue it any further, then we can bring it back under for action item. So I see Councilmember Remy's hand up. Councilmember Remy, and then we'll go to Councilmember Rambo.
Thank you, Councilmember Garitano. Trey, thanks for bringing this to our attention. I think it's an interesting idea. Have you met with the Wildwood Historical Society to get some background about how this flag was created?
No, but that would be something I would certainly be interested in pursuing forward if further action is taken on this.
I think probably before any action would be taken, I think it's probably important to understand a little bit about maybe the creation of this flag and maybe the history behind the logo. And I think that's an important first start, I think. And then I think it's a great, interesting, good idea. And I think something certainly many of us would love to perhaps consider. But I think it's important. I think a lot of people probably don't understand where this flag came from, I think, and how the logo was generated. But both of those two things are potentially mutually not exclusive, and we should at least look at both of them, but also in context of the history.
And I meant no offense towards the history or the people who designed this flag at all.
All right, Councilmember Rambo, and then Councilmember Bertolino.
Well, Councilmember Remy asked my questions. I was really just wondering about the history of the current flag, and I agree that maybe we can do a little better, and it's worth looking at. That's all I had to say.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Yeah, Trey, thank you for the presentation. And 5 years ago or so, when the Economic Development Committee was just a task force, and we engaged an outside consultant to do a economic development plan for us, one of the proposals was to change the logo, and which would include changing the flag at the time. We got significant pushback from folks who historically said, these three images, which they did pay some money and there was professional input and they were designed and so on. There was at that time, at least from a certain segment of the population, saying this is how we started and let's not change it. I wasn't one of them, Trey. I thought it was time to refresh things and get something more dynamic, but that didn't go very far 5 years ago, but maybe it's time to take a new look at it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I don't believe that it would have to be an either or. I think we could still keep the logo of Wildwood while maybe updating the flag and including some of the imagery from the logo. Again, I do have a design that I've made for it. However, if a citizen feel strongly about wanting to keep the logo, I would certainly say that it would be very good for them to include a flag design with the logo on it.
All right, I've got Councilmember Flasher and then Councilmember Remy.
Trey kind of spoke to what I was thinking, but I mean, there's nothing saying that we can't keep that logo in the new flag, whatever that is. I do think the timing of this is great with the COVID pandemic, like Trey spoke about. Also with the 25th anniversary and some of the other plants that we had being shot, it's kind of a fun time to revisit the flag. Thanks.
Good point.
Councilmember Remy?
I think both gentlemen just echoed my sentiment.
Okay, any other discussion on the topic there? Well, Mr. Trapani, I think you've heard some really good feedback tonight, and I think there's, obviously the historical element to where we are today with this, and then certainly, there's an opportunity maybe to see what we can do for this in the future. So, while right now, you're introducing this item here to the committee, I think it'll give the committee an opportunity to do some thinking about it, be able to get direction from the committee as to then at some point, after tonight's presentation, see what they think about what step to take forward. And what we could do is reach out to you. But, in the meantime, probably a good idea is maybe do a little bit of that research, talk to
Absolutely.
The Wildwood Historical Society. Let's see what you can find out about that. And I think then we can follow up with you.
Okay.
Is that the committee? Would the committee agree with that, or does anybody have any other suggestion? I see Councilmember Rambo has his thumbs up. All right, very good. Well, Mr. Trapani, it's great to have you here tonight. So thanks for really everything you've been doing. Really enjoy having you, your internship here with us. It's been great, and it's great to have you present tonight.
Thank you very much, and thank you for hearing me tonight.
Okay, thanks. All right, we are going to then proceed with our agenda. And the next item, this is a for information item. It is number 2, interpreters at public meetings, requested by Councilmember Clark. So Councilmember Clark did bring this up, and it was referred over to committee. So what we've done is put this to introduce it to the committee tonight. Just to get some perspective from Councilmember Clark as well. City Administrator Anselm has prepared a memorandum, I guess City Administrator Anselm, you want to speak to the memorandum that you've provided?
Yes, sir. Thank you again, and good evening, council members. In response to Councilmember Clark's request for interpreter services, I think it was made at perhaps the Coffee with the Mayor event, but I know she's spoken at a few meetings on this topic as well. In response to those requests, though, we went ahead and reached out to 3 companies that we know of that provide interpretation services here in the St. Louis area, just to get some information in terms of what the cost or potential cost might be if we were to provide interpreter services for all of our public meetings. So taking the information that we received from each of those companies and multiplying that by the number of public meetings that we have and the frequency that we have those meetings, came up with some estimated costs that I provided to you in that memo, along with some information on currently what we provide to community members who are either deaf or hard of hearing, as well as some things to consider if the committee decides to move forward with this approach. So happy to answer any questions that are raised in the memo, but I would certainly invite Councilmember Clark to have an opportunity to speak as well, if that's the chair's preference.
Councilmember Clark, do you want to speak?
I would like to speak. And I'm going to read this because I want to keep it as concise as possible and get all of this in. But the ability for our residents to engage in these city meetings is a right. It's not a privilege that we're simply allowing or offering to a certain group of citizens. This is a basic reason for the American Disabilities Act of 1990. You may recognize the phrase, all things are lawful, but all things are not profitable. The law can support the deaf community by offering the interpreter upon a 48-hour request, but it does not go far enough to give compassionate, equal, and fair opportunities to the deaf and hard of hearing that we hearing individuals have. I want to ask for equal communication in our council meetings, at least our council meetings, on behalf of our deaf and hard of hearing community. Let's remember that the sensitive terminology is deaf and hard of hearing, not hearing impaired, not handicapped, and not deaf and mute. It's true that not all people with hearing loss know sign language or use interpreters, but those who do are left out of a public discussion without one. Whether by choice or necessity for the use of interpreters for communication, the deaf individual is an expert on his or her needs, not the hearing community. Yesterday, Governor Mike Parson signed HB 1682 that recognizes September as Deaf Awareness Month and the last week of September as Deaf Awareness Week in Missouri. The Missouri Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing has made these transparent masks available to deaf and hard of hearing individuals and service professionals. We could all get one if we wanted. I thank the mayor and others for working so hard to include the closed captions on pre-recorded meeting videos. However, these positive actions don't help to solve our dilemma. You see, I have a passion for this subject because I have an adopted deaf son from China. Before I adopted him, I was involved in rebuilding live-in schools for disabled children in very poor cities in China. The lack of attention to people of all ages with disabilities was a common and disturbing occurrence. In fact, many times I cried and prayed over dying babies who were uncared for. My son was one of those children, and I was told he would never go to school because there were no provisions for him. He is now in his last year of one of the most difficult mechanical engineering programs in the country. So much potential is lost and so many people disregarded as unimportant, too expensive, or simply just another of the disabled. I've learned from my son that he is fine, I am fine. I don't want to be deaf, he doesn't want to be hearing, and there's nothing wrong with either of us. In America, we value the rights of people, all people. We can't allow ourselves to disregard the portion of our community who are deaf and hard of hearing, as I observed in remote areas of China. This disability is unlike others. Providing interpreters is a language accessibility right, where providing ramps for wheelchairs is a disability right. People have a right for getting information as it occurs in our city, whether it relates to emergency update or the future plans for progress. The must request in advance requirement has been a great deterrent in the inclusion of deaf and hard of hearing community, while we do everything possible to provide public meetings to our hearing residents. During the COVID-19 time is a prime example of that. This is problematic because it forces the one needing the interpreter to predict that on a particular meeting day, they will need an interpreter, and they pray that they don't get sick or have something else interfere with attending. This requires the deaf community to announce their medical diagnosis of deafness and label themselves as disabled in order to prepare in advance for being included in our public meetings. This has been a roadblock for the deaf community for many years. In fact, my son wanted to come tonight, but he interns with the US Navy and didn't want the hassle of complaints that he was wasting the city money if he was unable to attend at the last minute. I wouldn't be able to interpret for him while I spoke or you spoke, because he would have to have an interpreter of a certain level. The assumption that is often made when speaking of a need for sign language interpreters for the deaf and hard of hearing, and of course others who use this method of communication as well, is that ASL and English are fundamentally the same language and only superficially different. The fact is that they are superficially the same and enormously fundamentally different. ASL is a complete and complex language. English closed captioning is a wonderful resource, but it does not address the deaf in our city who communicate by ASL. A very common question from the hearing community is, can't they read lips? The most proficient lip reader can only accurately get 30% of the words from lip reading. Many, many words look the same on our lips. ASL is not the English language in gesture. It is a unique language that is used in the United States and a portion of Canada. Most countries have their own sign language. We in Wildwood are working hard to create a safe and high-quality neighborhood, provide good schools and jobs, develop a city where people want to stay, and render a place where all residents can be actively involved. If we provide and advertise a sign language interpreter in all of our regular council's meetings in time, our deaf and hard of hearing residents will become involved, and we will be the benchmark for other municipal governments in Missouri. Remember, this is not so much a disability issue as it is a language access issue, and information accessibility is a basic right. I'm asking that we budget in council meeting interpreters as an initial expenditure item in our yearly budget. I implore you not only to consider the needs of the hearing residents, but to give an equal consideration to the information access needs of the deaf and hard of hearing within Wildwood. Be the benchmark and fairly provide more equal access to real-time meetings. Our mayor is richly involved in making the city a place where we embrace diversity and has provided an interpreter for my son in the past. I know that City Administrator Anselm had put together this presentation for us tonight, and I thank him for that. And I ask you to put forward the plan to hire interpreters for each and every council meeting, regardless of whether or not they are requested by the deaf community. I furthermore ask that you do this without identifying, thus labeling, the deaf and hard of hearing person in attendance.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Clark, for your presentation here tonight. So I see Councilmember Remy's got his hand up here. Is there anyone else? Now I'll come back to you also, Councilmember Edens. So we'll start with Councilmember Remy, then go to Edens, and then Flasher.
I appreciate Councilmember Clark's presentation. I think it's absolutely something that we should consider moving forward with when we discuss this for an actionable item on the next meeting. Just as a point of reference, at the next city council meeting, I'll be putting forth a resolution for a quarterly community outreach, as Ms. Edens has provided me with that excellent name, where we will be evaluating ways that we can include all members of the city of Wildwood. And certainly this is something that I'm passionate about as well, and will be happy to support this as we go forward, and hope I get support for that resolution for this task force to evaluate ways that our city programming can improve for all members of our community.
All right, thank you. I believe the next person I had was Councilmember Edens.
So I appreciate the attachment that was provided, and Councilmember Clark is certainly very passionate. You're very knowledgeable about this, and I appreciate it being brought to our attention. Sometimes if you don't have an issue, you don't think about it, right? Because you're not a part of another group, and so it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So what I need now to better educate myself, but also make good decisions going forward, is to now put the emotion to the side, and I need some other hard numbers. So what I want to know is how many people realistically need this service in our community that are residents. So how many people roughly need an interpreter? And I say that too because we have, very, very low participation rates. And then also, I know Councilmember Clark, you're also very big on, cost benefits. So that would tell me what we would be spending per capita with an ASL translator. And the other thing that I am just a little bit confused on, so please help educate me on this, is when you said, I do understand how ASL is essentially a different language. There's different structures. Sometimes you spell things out. Sometimes there's a one gesture per word. But when you say that the closed captioning isn't enough because it's like a different language, what I just heard is that it's almost the implication that if you're deaf and you need ASL, that somehow you're illiterate. And I don't believe that to be true. So if you can read a book, why is reading closed captioning difficult? Can you expand on that? Help me understand what.
Sure. I can help you with that. If you think about, Councilman Edens, if you think about when someone is talking, if you have to read what they're saying, you are missing a lot. You're missing all of the emotion in their voice, and you aren't getting it all. You are missing a lot, plus the interpreting, I'm sorry, ASL is a whole different sentence structure. So they have to take this and translate it, not interpret it, but translate it into their language in your brain. If I am interpreting for someone speaking English, I have to take that in my brain, translate it, and then interpret it. So it's a 3-stage process. And so it takes a lot more to take that English, put it into a different language, and then put it into sign language. Because a person that grows up with sign language as their first language, they don't have a file cabinet of all of these words in their head like we do. They have a file cabinet of all of these pictures. So it's a concept language. So they have to translate that into words that they haven't heard these words. It doesn't mean anything to them. If everyone was deaf, no one would need words. We wouldn't need any words because it's all a concept. It's all a picture. And most people growing up deaf that use ASL have a real hard time reading technical works, anything that has jargon or is put into, it's a very concrete language. And so if there's anything abstract, if I read something that says, I was walking down the street and turned into the store, that's a concept in your head that you get, that I turned into a store. Or I was stuck to my friend all day. So reading that, it takes a lot more of transliteration in your head to change it. So if you get it in your own language of sign language, then you don't have to go through those 3 steps of translating.
So the closed captioning is more likely to benefit only part of the deaf community and those that are more likely to already be able to lip read?
No, more likely the ones that grew up what we call oral. So if you grew up oral only, that means that you didn't use sign language. You had maybe a cochlear implant or hearing aids or something that was assistive devices that actually helped you. Not all deaf people are helped by that, and not all deaf people choose assistive devices. Many will choose to be like my son, he's deaf, he's fine. He doesn't want someone to fix him. And that's a culture. It's not just a condition or a disability, it's a culture. And deaf people don't want to be fixed. They don't want hearing people coming in and telling them how to be deaf.
So I've got just a couple more questions for you, and then I'll yield the floor. And this is all for my education, so it's not meant to be interpreted, no pun at all, as pushback. Just so. I guess there are stages of reasonable accommodation. So there's the bare minimum legally, and then there's the kind of the gold standard, which you're saying that we're not at. So one of my questions is, because I am sorry that there's a stigma to this, but I don't think it's anything that someone shouldn't be proud of, that someone should have to apologize for. So I guess that's, and that's what you've just echoed, that I'm here, I'm deaf, and I'm proud of myself. So I guess I'm a little confused then about the stigma to declaring that you're deaf and requesting an interpreter. I know when we talked before, I said I equivocated it in my mind to displaying a handicap parking sticker in your window so that you can then park in that public space. And this is also a public meeting. So if you are accepting of yourself and proud, then why is it an undue burden to say, I'm requesting this service? Help me. And it seems like it's two inconsistent thoughts. And I agree that you shouldn't be singled out. For example, my church has interpreters usually at the big events like, holidays. And we can't tell who in the audience needs it. And that's the way it should be. But I guess I don't understand, if you're a proud member to be in the community and you're not embarrassed and you don't want to be fixed, why you would not be okay with asking for help and being proud of who you are. I can't reconcile it.
That's okay. I've had these same questions many times, having a deaf child growing up, in my home. So we've heard all of this. So it's not taken bad at all. It's just a matter of educating, like you said. But yes, they are very proud. But one of the things that deaf people, and we call it big D deaf. Big D deaf means capital D EAF for people who use sign language and are part of what they call the deaf culture or deaf world. And they don't want to be labeled. They don't want signs up in the neighborhood that says deaf child playing, maybe just child playing. But they don't want labels put on themselves or their children that says, okay, everybody look at me. Here's my disability. Everyone look at that. When Marcus was in school, they changed things because every morning they would say, who's going to be Marcus's note taker? Well, it focuses on what he doesn't do the same as the rest of them. So you don't want people to focus on that when they meet you. You want to just come in and be a person. And that's what they want, is just to be accepted as, here I am, and not everybody looking at me. And Lauren, unfortunately, a lot of people look at it as poor deaf person. And so it's not just about what the deaf person is feeling, but they get a lot of condescending looks and condescending talk, and people don't think they're very smart. It's just the way it is.
Okay, I would say that's true with other disabilities, especially physically too, that sometimes condensation or the looks as well. That's certainly an issue across the board. And I guess my other question too would be more information and kind of ruminating on is, if we're expanding for this particular disability, are we opening the door for additional budget line items? If someone came to me and said, I can hear through auditory means, all of the council and committee meetings, but as a blind person, I can't read any of the attached documents because they're not in Braille or there's not a system to read it out loud to me. And these are 200 and some page documents that we couldn't get a bid on to put in Braille or print it or offer it. So I'm wondering from a legal standpoint, if I'm expanding services, if I'm gonna get myself in trouble with an additional. So just something to think about. When we get more information, I would like that to be kind of rolled in. So when I'm asking for the numbers, I'm also asking for an assessment of.
Well, I can tell you that we won't be able to get the number of deaf people in an area. We can get an approximation, and we can get for like St. Louis County, but there's nothing on a census report or any report that's going to tell you how many. I mean, Gallaudet University tried to do that a long time ago and couldn't. So it's not something we'll be able to get how many. I mean, I can tell you in Wildwood, I know of maybe 10 people off the top of my head that are deaf. And that's 10 people that need to be here and be a part of this. Basing it on the number of people that are affected, I think we could get ourselves into trouble with that too. But when it comes to a disability of communication, it is a different disability than a disability of another physical disability. If it's got to do with blindness, I would say if somebody needs to come in and talk about that, then we need to address that also. But right now, I'm just focused on getting the people that I know in the city involved. And for one, my son, I know he wanted to take part in some things, and it's disappointing when you schedule it and then you can't be there, and then many people will almost verbally attack you saying, well, you cost us so much money in an interpreter. It's not like you and I that can just drop in when we're ready.
And well, I would still argue that canceling an interpreter is ultimate. Anybody that says that to your son or to you, canceling is still cheaper than some groups that can't afford to have it all the time. So I think that's a fair argument to push back. But my second thing is there are the woman that ran for school board in Rockwood, I believe, taught ASL. I'm trying to remember her bio. So I think there is a local community college teacher that teaches with certifications. One option to get costs down, I don't know if it's possible to work out an agreement with a program and people being certified just like you would student teach in a school district would be willing to offer their services at a reduced or free cost for credit hours. So I would ask that that be explored.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, we did use, Mr. Amston got some student interpreters to do a couple of times for our, I think it was our council meetings on virtual. And that then there was scheduling problems, so they couldn't do it any longer. The problem is you have to be, the students have to have a teacher that is willing to take all of that on his shoulders, because in this situation, this is city government, and you have to have the top level of interpreter license to be able to interpret for anything that's got to do with legal or medical. So even though I went through that program, and Mary Lupke, who is just on the school board, was one of my teachers. And even though I had a certification and license through the state of Missouri, I wouldn't be able to interpret in this setting. So we would have to make sure that they have the right level so that we meet with the state qualifications. Not all states are like that. Florida doesn't have a license, but we are very strict in Missouri.
Okay, I did see some other hands that I want to give an opportunity if they have questions. So, Councilmember Remy, I saw your hand up. It sounds like you have something to say. And then,
Yeah.
was there another hand besides Councilmember Remy?
Dan was
Councilmember
after me.
Flash. Oh, Dan, that's right, Councilmember Flasher. All right, and then we'll come to you, Councilmember Remy.
Sure. Yeah, Councilmember Edens asked a lot of the questions that I had. I did see in the memorandum that Mr. Anselm had put that nobody had requested these accommodations be made previously. Is that accurate?
To my knowledge, Councilmember Flasher, yes, I had a conversation with department heads and Director Vunich, who obviously has been with the city since day one, couldn't recall an instance when we provided an interpreter at a council meeting.
Okay.
Again, I don't know if, and I don't know that he would know if that had been requested and just, wasn't, if it was within the 48 hours or 24 hours, and we just couldn't make that accommodation or not. I don't know that I can answer that question for you definitively, but to his recollection, we had not provided that service at the request of somebody before.
Okay. And so then that question for Ms. Clark, is that then you think that's related to the fact that there's an uncomfortableness of coming into the situation and being kind of singled out? Do you feel like those two things are related then? And that is potentially why we haven't had that to this point?
Absolutely. Because a deaf person is not going to come to a place where there's no interpreter. They go, if you look at the churches, they'll go to the church that has an interpreter, or they'll go to the doctor that's easy to, that sets up the interpreter without any trouble. And believe me, there is trouble sometimes. But yeah, there's they will go where there's an interpreter. I've already talked with you probably know Jamie. I was from McDonald's, and he was saying, yeah, he would kind of like to come to council meetings. There's some other people that I've talked with that said they kind of like to come to council meetings, but they were sure they wouldn't be able to get anything out of it because there's no interpreter. And
so, sorry to interrupt you, but Mr. Anselm's thing had suggested that no one had even requested the 48-hour advance notice. So do you think that there's a reason that no one's requested that, or is it more, I just hope you could speak to that a little bit more for me.
Yes, 48 hours is a long time to schedule an interpreter in advance for a council meeting, for just about anything. My son did schedule for something here. I think it was maybe Mayor Coffee at one point, and had a good interpreter, was here, interpreted the whole thing, did a good job. But that still doesn't give the deaf person equal access to the information, because if they didn't schedule and all of a sudden they see something on the agenda that they really wanted to take part in, they can't.
So maybe if I could interject, just to be respectful of everyone's time. I know, and Councilman Remy, I'm going to get to you in a second. I know this is for information item, so we're not going to take any action. And as you made in your statement, Councilmember Clark, it's more for consideration when the budgeting process comes along. But potentially maybe one thing that the group can think about, and again, no decision needs to be made tonight, is maybe the city would consider piloting something, committing to doing something for a period of 2 or 3 months and see how the usage is, to determine whether then, to proceed forward, modify it, and so forth. But something just to think about. I think that decision would be best, or the actions would be made during the budgeting process. So Councilmember Remy, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I think in that budgeting process, I think we should be clear about two things. And Councilmember Clark did an excellent job, I think, of presenting this. So I'd love to see if we wouldn't develop a pilot program. I think that's a good idea. I think in the area, we've got multiple areas of schools for the deaf, including Central Institute and St. Joseph's, and there's a couple. There may be opportunities also to partner with some of those schools to be able to develop some novel programs that could certainly encourage community cooperation with our hard of hearing friends. I also do think, though, that we also need to make sure that we give equal access to the greater than 90% of folks that have sensorineural hearing loss and or deafness, that don't need sign language interpreters, but in fact actually do need real-time closed captioning. And they need to do that via voice recognition. And I'm not playing favorites one versus the other, but actually that's a far larger population than the congenital deaf population. So I think we need to look at both of those things, and I'm not pitting them ones against the other. I think they're both valid things that need to be evaluated and certainly probably need to be considered for budgetary discretion as we move forward.
And to just to make folks aware, the city invested, I would think maybe about 2 years ago, in a system that for I guess would make those that are hard of hearing, they have some hearing, but not complete loss. We have a system where it's a wireless system that folks can use headphones, and it's connected to the speaker system in the council chambers. And we did have a council member that one time used that because he had trouble hearing. So there's just a awareness of that option that's there. It may not be a solution, obviously, for those that have complete loss of hearing. But with that, I think Councilmember Remy brings up a good point to consider, that if there are places, institutions that are teaching sign language, that maybe it's a requirement of hours of practice. I don't know. I'm just thinking, but if there's something that's people need time to practice, this could be a venue to do that in. So, did we have any other hands up at this point? Councilmember Eden, sorry, I just saw your hand up now. All right, so go ahead, Councilmember Edens.
When we say pilot, I mean, that could be something in the future. I just want more information brought back to me first, so I'm not just having an open-ended discussion about whatever pilot could look like, but that could be one thing that comes out of it. We try something, and what if no one takes advantage of it?
Well, that's what a pilot tells you.
Right, and that will be participation levels are kind of low across the board. So there's a real potential for that to happen. Councilmember Clark, I can tell you, I just want you to kind of prepare yourself, because we have all begged people to be involved. We've tried to get people to vote in our community, and we've asked people to volunteer for committees, and a lot of times people don't. So just prepare yourself if you offer this and your son is the only one to take advantage of that. That's a real possibility. Just involvement across the board is pretty low. So I don't want your feelings to get hurt if that happens. Sometimes if you build, there's the phrase, if you build it, they will come. And what I've seen a lot is in government, that doesn't always work.
Councilmember Clark, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yes. It's you can say whatever and don't worry about it. It's not going to hurt my feelings. We've been through this many times, so we just are building on things. You have to start somewhere, and so this is what I'm really throwing out there to start with. And if there's no one here, if that interpreter is in one of these little boxes on our iPads that somebody can watch at home, we won't know that either. But I would imagine we're helping them at home as well as we are the hearing people by being able to watch it.
Yeah, and there might be other things too that we can talk about at a future meeting, but surveying the city population to see about the need for this, and getting more information out of that. If it's a need, like they would come in person versus watching it from home. And then City Administrator Anselm did bring up a point in his memorandum that we might need to think this through, how it works, because the interpreter is one component. And I had this question because if you have the interpreter, I think it works really good if you're in the room. But the way our live stream is set up, it's a camera that's all the way in the back. So everyone looks a lot smaller in video because it's a big wide angle lens to cover the whole dais. So the question of how does the interpreter fit in so that they could be part of the live stream may require additional technical investment. Like you said, the little box with the person in there. So something that's got to be thinking about. But I think this has been a good discussion here. Good, I think a good opportunity for the committee members to do some thinking about it. And then as we get into the budgetary process, I think that's going to be an opportunity then to determine how we want to address that there. So Councilmember Clark, thank you so much for a really good presentation. Really appreciate your time to do that tonight and see how we can address that need.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Next on the agenda, and of course my agenda closed out here. So give me a moment here to reopen it. Unless you want me to read to you what was on the Town Center Update Team agenda. All right.
It's cleaning up the rest of the agenda, council member.
Yes, thank you. Good, good. All right, so we're nearing the end here. So now that we have a new makeup of the committee, we've done this before as an opportunity to kind of start with a new slate. We have some leftover items that have been brought up that I would like to just run through here. And this is for action, so that this way what I would ask of is whether or not we keep it, or basically there is no further need to consider this item in the future. Some of these items may have been important at the time that they were brought up, but they are no longer perhaps of significance, or no longer there's a need to discuss at this time. They certainly can be brought back by committee members. So if I run through them, maybe what I could do is ask maybe just a simple indication. Well, how about if I run through them and then I'll ask just as each one if there's any objection, and then we'll do one motion that summarizes what we're going to keep in the items not ready for action. So with that, the social media policy, I think that's an important body of work that needs to continue. A lot of time invested in that. I don't think anyone will object that we keep that there, right? Okay. The next item is 2 elected officials or appointed officials paying for records request. Any objections to, let's see, any objections to removing the item? Or do you want to keep it and discuss it?
Have we, sorry.
Yes, please go ahead.
Councilmember Garrett, and on that vein, did we, just to refresh my memory, have we ever officially voted? So just to give some feedback to folks that were unaware. So previously, members of council could get records without a sunshine request, like the public would have to be able to obtain those records. But there was a feeling that that's not transparent and provides equipoise for members of the community versus people on council. And so just so we're on the same page, I don't recall, did we ever vote to just adopt that policy so that we didn't provide favoritism to council?
No, I don't recall that we've made any policy change to that, unless someone wants to correct me on that.
So, and from that perspective, then, without objection, I would actually just ask if we just put it on next month's meeting, and then we can get it done with.
Okay, I don't think that's an issue there, and it is in the high priority column, so perfect. All right, next under the medium, the first item, the inclusion of alcoholic drinks at city-sponsored events. So again, I'll just ask, are there objections to removing that item? And this is another item that is brought up, and the thought was that occasionally there are some events, and I think occasionally just two, such as the business appreciation event, where there are some drinks available for the attendees. That's kind of a semi-formal type of event that people come to recognize the leaders in the business community. So is this still a concern or any objections to removing that? Hearing none. All right, then we're going to note that we'll have a motion made to remove that item. And then the next item is the outdoor information kiosk. This is another item that I think there has been some time and invested in it, but there were several different options that were being considered. So, Councilmember Edens, you want to say something on that?
Yeah, looking back, I know that the kind of the last thing that we talked about is we felt that there were not, the proposal did not take advantage of other technological options. I know Councilmember Remy specifically remembered, I think it was a Janus board as an option that could have lowered costs. And I thought we left it as it would be brought back for information with a new cost and exploration of other technologies as specifically recommended by Dr. Remy. And then we never really heard anything again. So money's tight. I know we weren't crazy about the original plan, but I thought there were other things that we were going to explore that we didn't. So if there's a cheaper, more interactive, better version that we can put on the budget for next year or even 2 years from now, then I would encourage us to still keep it on the agenda, but only bring it back up with that new information that we previously requested. Unless, I know Larry's not on. I think that was before Councilmember Farmer was on, or maybe you had that conversation with us. Councilmember Bernalino, am I misremembering that, or does that sounds pretty accurate?
That sounds right. I think that was right at the beginning of me. That sounds about right.
Okay, so I would like to bring it back up, but only in the context that what we asked for is included.
So therefore, what I would say is we'll keep it there, but that means then we want to keep it moving. We don't want the list to just be a repository that just sits out there. So the intent is then that we are going to ask our city staff to do that work so that we can bring it back to the committee then over the period of the year. Councilmember Rennie.
Maybe, I think Councilmember Edens is spot on. I think we had this discussion while we did this meeting not in the community room. We had it actually in council chambers. And if I remember, so maybe the consideration could be is if we put this on the August agenda for admin public works, then the concept could be that we could take whatever we learn at that meeting and then consider trying to find a way to include that in the budgetary discretion meeting going in the fall for 2021, maybe.
Okay, with that, is that something that the city, I guess, city administrator or director of public works, you think we can accommodate that request and get that information?
I think we can certainly look into it. As I recall, the issue with a moving sign or a message board is it's in conflict with our current ordinances. And so we wouldn't want to do something that we couldn't allow other organizations or entities to do. So I'll need to do a little bit more exploring in that regard, because it would almost have to be a stationary, LED or LCD display. It can't move because we don't allow other organizations or businesses to provide.
Point of information. I think what we came up with was like a larger version of an iPad rather than a sign. So it was touch and interactive, and that was why it didn't qualify as a sign. Mm-hmm. Almost like what you go into at an airport and check in and get your ticket kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are some concerns, that we've talked about internally at staff with that idea, but I'll be happy to explore that. And if we can get some information for August, we'll be happy to provide that to you.
Okay, good. And again, this does not, because of that moving screen or interactiveness, this is not intended to replace what the law requires as far as posting of materials. So we still have to post materials, which right now that is in the lobby at City Hall, the second floor.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So with that, we'll keep it. So Councilman Remy?
So thank you. I think that's helpful. Just some potential agenda items, if you don't mind, Chair Council Garitano, for the August meeting. Could we consider two things? One, just to check with our new council members, was the email policy already discussed in the orientation?
I believe it was included with their orientation materials, but it was not specifically discussed.
All right, just one, it may be worthwhile for us to just, if we're gonna, is to just make sure that everybody's understanding of what our policy that we passed through this committee to council was, just so everybody's on board with understanding that. Maybe just, we might be worth us having a refresher of some of the things that came out of this committee for the folks that are new to the committee. But the second thing I might suggest is last year, I believe it's probably in and around August, and Councilmember Bertolino may recall this. We did request, and both Mr. Brown and Mr. Vunich provided this, which was excellent, which was a listing and just really quick run through of all the intended projects for the upcoming year, and things that are still pending that may not have been bid out yet. But I think that seeing everything on there, because we obviously talked about the Stryker Road sidewalk tonight, and certainly I want that to be on an agenda in the next couple of months because it's important to the people in my ward for a long time now. But I want to see if we could get that list of upcoming projects, just so everybody can keep on their radar as we move forward with a lot of these votes of other things that are at least strategically being planned for.
If I could comment on that, Chair.
Sure.
Yeah, we talked at our department head staff meeting earlier today about mid-year budget process, and we're starting that right now. So our finance officer is putting together the information. She still needs to close the books for June from an expenditure perspective, but then her plan next week is to start looking at that, putting those figures together for mid-year. And I would assume that would include a review of sort of the capital projects that we have for not just the remainder of this fiscal year, but essentially the 5-year plan. But to the conversation earlier regarding Stryker Road versus Old State Road versus XYZ, I think we can do a better job from a budgeting perspective of asking and engaging council members for the list of the items that they think need to be on a capital improvement list. And then we have to go through some sort of exercise to prioritize those, agree to that priority list, because that's going to give the staff the information they need to start really preparing the budget that's going to address those priorities that council has identified, at least from a capital improvements perspective. But I would argue the same needs to happen for our operational budget as well.
I think that's an outstanding point. I appreciate that comment. That's great.
Mm-hmm. Councilman Evans?
I've had this conversation with a couple of council members. With Attorney Young, I don't believe I've had it with our city administrator, but I was going to request this be added on the agenda, but now I'm going to actually request, basically without objection, that it's moved up before the social media policy. It has come to my attention because we are not considered like, the full-time or part-time employees held to the employee handbook, and we do not essentially have an HR director. That if there is a sexual harassment issue or harassment issue, period, that occurs between elected officials, you have two recourses. One is a recall election, where you make everything public, and your other option is a police report. So we need an internal harassment policy to hold ourselves accountable. And I think that that's a higher priority than the social media policy.
Okay, so if there isn't any objection, what we'll do, maybe if I can get a motion, we'll get a motion for first.
Motion.
What'd you say?
Motion.
Okay, well, let me recap the motion. So motion with regard to this topic of items not ready for action, we will remove the high priority item number 2, which is, no, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. We will remove the medium priority item number 1, the inclusion of alcoholic drinks at city sponsored events. No need to proceed with that one forward. We will add an item on this, and Councilmember Remy, do you want to add Stryker Road, the sidewalk in Ward 3?
To be honest with you, I would love that, but let me just be clear. We've got a new group of people in admin public works, and I think that the city administrator Ansom's approach of listing all the capital projects and to make sure that maybe we with the city staff agree upon where the prioritization should occur. I would much rather that. Now, don't get me wrong. I would love my ward to be at the top of that list, but I know Ward 8 is going to get there well ahead of me.
Well,
So-
Ward 8 works hard. They advocate.
I know it does, of course, but
I
I
can
would
teach
actually,
you.
I would prefer, I'd rather move forward with a process that's going to be equitable for all.
Sure. So in that case, then we'll wait until we get a list, and then we'll work on prioritization on that. Okay. So then in that case, then the other item would be the item that Councilmember Edens raised that we'll put on the list. So as far as how would you title that, or do you have a suggestion?
I am focusing on sexual harassment. However, if you wanted to include other forms of harassment, maybe because of gender identity or another issue, orientation, that would be acceptable as well. But
okay, so maybe
title it sexual harassment. That would be
But harassment policy.
just
Yeah.
maybe keep it since you said there's other items, and maybe just a harassment policy at this point.
that would be appropriate.
Okay. All right. And we will put that there on the agenda to help us with the prioritization. At times we would get a long list of items, hence why we then created a high, medium, low. High meaning that we want to address it within the next few months, at least 2-3 months out. Medium beyond that, probably up to like 6 months out. And then low can probably wait until about 12 months out the most. So where do we see the urgency with that? You want to?
I would move the harassment right up there on the list, because anything could happen at any time to any member of this council. The sooner it's on the books, the better.
Okay.
Because it's not like something's ever really grandfathered in unless we write it that way. And the other thing too is, and I know I've had this conversation with Sam, and I am excited about the potential to create a new task force, but we can also offer ourselves other educational opportunities for diversity. There's a lot of stuff in the news about bias training. I think it would be appropriate for our committee to look at programs or training that we can offer ourselves as elected officials, or recommend for employees, whereas a citizen community members, maybe that's not as appropriate for them to recommend something for our employees. So if it's okay, I'd like to add that on the list as well. And I think that there's some urgency with that.
Okay, so what we'll
Given
do
what's
then.
been expressed by my constituents to me personally and to Don.
All right. So in that case, and Carla, I hope you're getting all of this here. So we've got the removal of B1, and then under high priority, we will add a harassment policy. And then the other item, as you mentioned, is around training, but it sounds like various types of training. So I'm trying to think of a way to kind of describe that a little bit better. Is that something you had in mind already, Councilmember Edens, or
just we'll say bias training.
is that any objections from the committee around that, or any alternative options? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do that in the motion. If that sounds good to everyone, then we'll need a maker of the motion. And Councilmember Edens, you had raised your hand before, so do you want to make the motion?
I'll make the motion as stated by Chair Caratano.
Thank you. A second for that motion? Councilmember Farmer? Okay, Carla, do you have the motion?
I do.
All right, good. All right, with that then, voice vote. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any oppose? Any abstentions? All right, the motion passes. Okay, with that, anything on the miscellaneous? All right, hearing none, then the next meeting date will be, I guess, scheduled for the beginning of August. I believe August 4th is our next meeting date. And then is there a motion for adjournment? Made by Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Flasher. Motion is undebatable. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, any opposed? Any abstain? All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. A lot of work done tonight. Thanks again. Have a good one.